You are listening to the Overthinker's Guide to Joy, episode 51. This is the one where we're going to talk about the most powerful thought you can think. Let's dive in. This is a podcast for overthinkers, overdoers, and overachievers who are tired of feeling over-anxious and just want to feel better. I'm your host, certified life coach, Jackie DeCrenis. Hi there, and welcome back. So, as many of you know, I spend a lot of time on this podcast talking about the power of your thoughts. And this is kind of the cornerstone of coaching. Coaches are like private trainers for your mind. We work with clients to help them identify their thoughts, their thought patterns, their limited beliefs, which is just a term for recurring negative thoughts that often hold us back in some way. Learning to be in touch with your thoughts and learning to challenge them, in other words, not taking every thought you have as gospel or truth, is a really powerful tool because our brains like to trick us, meaning we like to come up with a thought and then we like to believe it, like that it's the absolute 100% truth. And learning to turn it around and go, is that true? Is that 100% true? Is the most valuable tool you can learn to sort of stop overthinking in its tracks. So why do our brains trick us in that way? Well, it's because we're wired for safety and self-preservation. Our brains are looking for what could go wrong, or we tend to focus on what did go wrong instead of what went right. While safety and preservation are important to our survival, this kind of thinking can often lead us to feeling overly anxious and worrying about what could happen or might happen instead of the present and what is happening. So in other words, too much worry leads to hypervigilance, either future or past focus, and it robs us of being present. Well, not every person is wired this way. Those of you who identify as overthinkers or anyone that suffers from stress or anxiety, people-pleasing, or similar conditions know exactly what I'm talking about. So in the past episodes, I've talked about how to reframe your thoughts, as well as our thoughts create our results in life. But today I want to talk about one of the most powerful thoughts you can think when you're feeling stuck in a situation. Oftentimes, we can feel like victims of a circumstance or victims of multiple circumstances. We think that things just happen to us. And while circumstances happen to us all the time, we don't have to be victims of them. We are never powerless in a particular circumstance. And we're never truly stuck. We are always capable of turning that victim mentality around with just one thought. And that thought is this: I have choices. Because we always have choices. And yet, we forget this. We give away our power to others by letting them dictate our circumstances and by giving up our own power to choose. So I thought for the purpose of this episode, I would share a few client stories. So I have one client who currently feels stuck in her career. She makes good money, but the demands of her job are relentless. She typically has so many meetings that she's almost booked every hour on the hour, Monday through Friday, and then has a ton of material to read and digest in the evenings and weekends. So she never feels like she ever gets away from the pressures of work. It consumes her. Her emails come in all hours of the day and nights, and because she works in television, navigating the politics within her company is like another full-time job. So she feels like a prisoner of her job and stress, and it's kind of infecting all aspects of her life, her relationships, her health, her outlook. So we spent some time talking about choices. She could choose to look for another job. She could choose another career path. She could quit her job, or she could just choose to look at it differently. She could get in touch with the aspects of why she chose this career in the first place. And in her case, it was because it was creative, it was prestigious, and it was lucrative. So I asked her, are those things still true? And she said they were. It is still creative, and it's still prestigious, and it's still lucrative. So in that case, she could choose to show up every day sitting in that energy. The energy of, I chose this path and I still choose this path. And then from that place, what she could do is create a more manageable work schedule for herself. She could shorten her meeting times. She could organize her calendar for a meeting-free day to catch up on her work or just more time to think creatively. She could create boundaries around answering emails, say early in the morning or later in the evening. You get the idea. But the point is, once you sit in the energy of I choose this path, then what action can you take to alleviate your self-imposed stress? In another case, I have a client who is a working mom and is just burned out from her job and raising kids and running her household. She wanted to take a weekend away, but was afraid to ask her husband for time away from their family. She was afraid he wouldn't take kindly to the request. And this further perpetuated her feelings of overwhelm and feeling trapped by her circumstances. So I asked her, what did you choose in this situation, in this life you've created? And she said, well, I chose to have a career and to get married and to have a family, but I didn't know that it would be so overwhelming, or I didn't know it would be so all-encompassing and not leave much breathing room for me. So we explored what choices she had now given the choices she made earlier. She could just continue to suffer through the burnout, growing resentful of her children and her husband and her career, or she could have a conversation with her husband explaining what was going on for her and that she needed to take a weekend away with a friend or a sister or whatever, even by herself, just to have a break from the routine. Now, she was fearful this might upset her husband and he might feel burdened by taking care of the kids himself, or he might resent her for taking time without him, or he might be passive-aggressive when she returned. But when she got in touch with what she truly needed and was able to sit down with him and have an open and honest conversation about it, the results were really excellent. While her husband was a little uncomfortable at first, he embraced it. And it was kind of a bonding experience for them to have clear communication. So had she not done this, that is being open to a conversation with the possibility of discomfort with her husband, she would have just chosen to be uncomfortable and unhappy and resentful in her own body and her own mind, which would have been a terrible disservice to both her husband, her career, and herself. In another case, I have a client who is on the precipice of a divorce, and she moved away as part of a trial separation. And the separation has been very good for both her and her husband. So now she's not sure if she wants to go back and live with him, or if she wants to travel, or if she wants to get a more permanent place in her new location. She's sort of at a crossroads of choice. And she said, as liberating as it is to finally have choices in my life, and they're all kind of exciting and interesting, she said, I feel overwhelmed by them. She says, I have decision paralysis. And I said, well, what's causing the paralysis? And she said, I'm simply afraid to make the wrong choice. So I'd rather not make any choice. And that was causing her great distress. That is being in limbo. Well, she says, as a self-proclaimed people pleaser, she just is so accustomed to making everyone else happy that she's afraid of judgment. She's afraid of making the wrong choice and then people saying, I told you so, or why did you think that was a good idea? And this is one of the most common problems for overthinkers and people pleasers. They're afraid to make their own choices because they're afraid of judgment and they're afraid of somebody being upset with them. Well, where does that come from? Most often, it comes from our childhood. When there was a controlling or difficult parent or authority figure at the helm of our childhood, oftentimes that parental figure pounced on the opportunity to shame the child for choices they didn't approve of. So in order to avoid the wrath, whether that was verbal or emotional or physical abuse, the victim, that is the child, developed the coping mechanism of people-pleasing and not being in touch with what they really wanted. In other words, they gave away their power of choice when they became adults. So when they finally became adults and were free from that controlling authority figure, they simply transferred the power to others, whether that was their romantic relationships, their friendships, their bosses, or their colleagues. So even if we break the cycle of parental approval, if we don't recognize that this was a pattern in our life, we just keep repeating it in other ways and other forms. This is how we end up with decision paralysis. We become overwhelmed or paralyzed by having choices. So how do we combat this? Well, we learn to embrace that choice is a way of taking your power back. Once again, it starts with our thoughts. So here are some powerful thoughts around choice. You can think to yourself, I trust myself, or there are no wrong choices. I can trust my gut. Or if I make a mistake, I can always make another choice later. This choice does not define me. I have other choices. I am not stuck. Or my favorite one is every choice is an opportunity for learning. So you don't have to adopt all of these thoughts. You don't have to adopt any of these thoughts. The exercise is to find a thought. And if there's one on this list, by all means, take notes, write it down. But if there's a thought that resonates with you, that you can go to when you need or want or have to make a choice, if you can choose one of these thoughts and sit in the empowerment of choice, you are taking your power back and you're taking control of your life. So another powerful question is this: what choice would I make if I didn't have to consider anyone else's feelings or opinions? If you can answer this honestly, this is likely to be your North Star. I'm not saying you should not consider loved ones in your decisions, but in order to find your path, you have to be able to answer that question first, even if it's not the path you take. But it's about knowing where you would like to be if you only considered your own thoughts and feelings. And sometimes then the path will present itself just because you know where you're going. So there's a choice in every action that we do or not do. Even if you're in a situation that feels like there is no way out due to financial circumstances or logistical circumstances or custodial circumstances, you still have a choice about what you think about your situation. So I was listening to an interview with the director, Sean Levy. He's not only the executive producer of Stranger Things, but he was the director of Free Guy. He was director of the Night at the Museum franchise. He's done so many brilliant comedies, and he's just beloved in the entertainment business. So he was doing this interview conducted by some of his friends, and they commented on how much fun he is to be around, both personally and professionally. They love working with him, and they love just hanging out with him. So they said, Sean, where did that come from? Like, where did that joyous love of life, love of your work, love of your friends, love of everything come from? And he explained that although his parents were divorced when he was 3 and his mother was a bit of a drinker, which was not a very happy upbringing, he remembered making the decision as a little boy, I want to choose a happy life. He felt like it was a choice. And now that he has this huge movie and television career as a writer, director, and even actor, he loves what he does. He entertains millions of people around the globe, and he just enjoys his life. So as a result, he has this sort of infectious nature. And so people who work with him and know him and hang out with him enjoy him too. But all of this comes from sitting in the energy of I chose this. I am choosing to do this. I have choices. Or even the thought, I choose to be happy in this situation. Like Sean Levy said, I chose to have a happy life. These are just powerful, energetic shifts, even if you don't change your circumstance. Just thinking that you've made a choice. So you might ask yourself this: what are you currently choosing to tolerate? And what different choice could you make today? Because it's up to you. It's all a series of choices. And that's the power in and of itself, is knowing that you're in control of those choices. All right, friends, I want to wish you a great week. And as always, I look forward to talking to you next time. And bye for now. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Overthinker's Guide to Joy. If you're enjoying these episodes, please subscribe or follow this podcast so you can always be in the know when the next episode drops. If you would like to learn more about working with me as a coach, you can connect with me through my website at jackiedecrenis.com. That's JACKIEDECRINIS.com.